Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here on the last panel of the last day of this summit.
You made it.
We have a great panel today for you, an all-woman panel for you. So thank you for being here. We have, like I said, an excellent panel. Some of the many diverse perspectives that are involved in communicating science and engaging in the public are represented right here. The expertise embodied in this panel range from experiential-based field education to issue advocacy to science interpretation and then to social marketing. So we have a wide variety of expertise. I'm going to introduce the panels, but before I do, I just want to quickly introduce myself so you know who I am. I'm Abby Turna, and I'm the Water Resources Extension Agent for University of Florida IFAS Extension in Sarasota County. And I do education and outreach surrounding water quality and quantity issues in Sarasota County. And it is a dream of a job. I'm sure these ladies also have dream jobs. I've heard a lot about them. So let me introduce them to you now. First, we have Nanette Holland O'Hare. She's Chief Communicator at O'Hare Communications. Nanette earned a BS in journalism from the University of Florida. She loves being outside and realized at a very early age that she wanted to know both the common names and the scientific names of all the plants and animals she encountered on her outdoor explorations. And that led her to also want to teach others about the environment and natural world and how to care for it. She's worked as an environmental reporter for several Florida newspapers and received several awards. She was even nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Nanette spent 2 decades managing creative communications and educational campaigns for the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. In 2017, Nanette founded her own business, O'Hare Communications, to help do-gooders do better by improving the ways in which they teach, reach, and inspire the current and future caretakers of our woods, wetlands, and waters. Welcome, Nanette. Thank you. Next, we have Melissa Kane-Nell. She's the division manager for the Volunteer and Education Division of Manatee County Parks and Natural Resources Department. Is that how you have to introduce yourself?
Yes.
And I thought I had it bad. Melissa has a master's degree in environmental education and is a certified interpretive guide, heritage interpreter, and an advanced master naturalist. Melissa joined Manatee County Parks and Natural Resources more than 12 years ago, and she's grown her department substantially. Melissa and her team offer more than 40 public and private education and volunteer programs each month, signature special events, and create standalone programs to help others connect with and learn to respect the natural world. Thus, somewhere at the intersection of science, art, and magic, you'll find professional educator Melissa Nell. Next, we have Dr. Tracy Venera. Said that right? She is the manager for environmental health at Moat Marine Laboratory. Tracy earned a PhD, ME, and BS in environmental engineering from the University of Florida, with the focus on hydrology, pollutant transport, stormwater treatment, and sustainable design. Tracy has extensive experience in hydrologic and hydraulic modeling and stormwater quality analysis through her research, even involving storm chasing, laboratory analysis, and field investigations. She also has 10 years of engineering consulting expertise. Tracy now manages the environmental health program at Moat, and she is working to investigate the effects of marine and freshwater chemicals on the environment and public health, as well as developing, designing, and implementing strategies to alleviate those impacts. Tracy was recently featured on the Science Channel television series Mythbusters: The Search.
I meant to delete that.
Oh, but you didn't. All right, last but certainly not least is Jennifer Rubello. Rubiello, thank you. She is the State Director of Environmental Florida Research and Policy Center. She has a BA from the University of California, Berkeley. Jennifer directs Environmental Florida's efforts to protect the state's water, air, and open spaces through research, education, advocacy, and grassroots organizing. She has led successful campaigns to close loopholes in the Clean Water Act, build support for the Clean Power Plan, and stop the expansion of fracking in Florida. Prior to assuming her role with the Environment Florida Research and Policy Center, Jennifer organized campaigns for impact in Green Corps, Over the last 7 years, she has overseen public education campaigns that have reached over 250,000 people. She also serves as a treasurer for Suncoast Surfrider Foundation and a steering committee member of the Floridians Against Fracking Coalition. Jennifer lives in St. Pete and enjoys kayaking and sailing and enjoying the waters of Florida. So we have a great panel who's going to talk about how they engage with the public and how they communicate science to the public. So first, I would like to hear about what does public engagement look like from your various perspectives? Because what we know is that public engagement is a tool for resolving community conflict and building community support for an action or a cause or connecting scientists to the public. So how does it look like from your various perspectives? And Nanette, would you mind going first?
I'm in the hot seat, the catbird seat, so I'm first. To me, public engagement is any time I have an interaction with a citizen. That is public engagement. So that could be something as simple as a phone call from a citizen. It could be an email from a citizen. It could be a post on social media. It could be facilitation. It could be teacher workshops. It could be experiential learning. It could be simply programs that increase awareness, but public engagement is a broad term that encompasses all of those things, and all of those skills and expertises are represented here. So from my perspective, I just look at it with a very broad brush, that it is any time I have any contact with a citizen. That is public engagement.
Thank you.
Yeah, so definitely the broad, but also a little bit of a more narrow focus. You can have amazing public engagement deciding on a particular audience and narrowing in and really targeting those folks. So for our organization, we do look on the broad range, but also trying to target those specific individuals in our messaging. But I also wanted to mention that with public engagement, something to keep in mind is even those sticky situations and those conversations that you might not want to have. Like, I am the person that often gets the angry phone calls. And that is an amazing opportunity for public engagement. Because when I have somebody call me up and ask me, why are the scary, ugly, dead trees at one of our preserves still up? They're snags, we left them there on purpose. It was a really wonderful opportunity to talk with that person and get them to have a little bit of a better understanding of why we do what we do. So there's definitely those opportunities where we plan to have public engagement, but also maybe the times when it's a little bit more of a delicate situation and we're able to engage.
So public engagement, from my perspective, I'm a researcher. And if you look at the history of science and engineering, we used to be the rock stars. You know, people used to come from all over to see experiments and for scientists to explain what they're doing and why they're doing it and how it will impact their lives. And we've just got so far away from that with our research demands and writing proposals and grants, and we've become introverts. And the general public is not reading our publications. And for me, it's really important to communicate what we're doing and why we're doing it to the public so that they can stand behind us. Because the only way that regulations are changed is through public demand. You know, anything that's going to cost money is going to need the citizens behind that. So for me, public engagement and Mote Marine Laboratory has been great at giving me a platform to speak to people about what we're doing at Mote and why.
Well, let's see. So we at Environment Florida work to empower everyday citizens with the tools and the information that they need to weigh in on debates, whether it's at the local or state or federal level, debates around the quality of our environment and our lives. And so when I think of public engagement, I think of it more as a ladder. So the first rung of the ladder could be anything from going to a beach cleanup or signing a petition. The next ladder could be making a phone call to a decision maker. The ladder after that could be, the rung after that could be attending a town hall meeting or speaking at a county commission meeting. And even above that would be meeting with a decision maker, whether it's in again, City Hall or a boardroom too, right? And then ultimately, I think the ultimate form of public engagement is people who are empowering others to do all of those things, right? Who are organizing people with the tools to get more people engaged.
Excellent. So a lot of diverse ways of engaging with the public, and you named a lot of different tools. I really like the unplanned public engagement piece. I was going into the lake 2 days ago at IFAS, and I do lake watch, and so I was taking samples, and I had a woman come running after me saying, hey, did you know that there's alligators in there? And I was like, yeah. But had I thought or didn't listen to Melissa, I would have never taken that opportunity or thought about taking the opportunity to engage with her and be like, yes, as a matter of fact, I did. And the reason why I'm doing this is because, so thank you, Melissa. I will do that now instead of just look at her like, why are you harassing me? I'm just trying to collect a sample.
That happens too, just internally.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to go ahead and ask our first audience question, if that's okay. I really would like to know from the audience, how do you and your organization engage with the public? And this is a choose all that applies scenario. And then panelists, I'm going to ask you to react.
React. Okay, look with shock.
So the choices are through stories, interpretation, social media, social marketing, public forums and workshops, classes, letters to the editor, opinion pieces, or other, which is obviously not explained. I'm wondering what people are thinking when they're putting in other.
Yeah. Where would citizen science be in here?
Citizen science would probably be public forums, workshops, and classes. Maybe not. Maybe it's other.
Maybe it's other. I would have put other. That's what.
All right, so we got about 70 answers in, and what we can see is that public forums, workshops, and classes and social media are the main ways in which this audience is engaging with the public. And a lot of people put stories, which I really like. So can you tell us about some of the tools that you use, and maybe you want to pick out one of these tools and talk about it in more depth? Nanette.
Well, I think looking at the results, I'm seeing on one side what I would consider a very traditional form of public engagement, which is getting people to come to us, right? Public forums, workshops, and classes, and a more current form of engagement, which is social media, which is really something that I believe very strongly in and specialize in. It is a force for evil, but also a force for good. And I prefer to look at it as a force for good when it comes to involving people in environmental issues, particularly people who may not go out and attend a workshop or a class. So I'm not surprised to see that the kind of yin and yang, because I think we're all struggling with that. We have a lot of pressure, sometimes you do, from your organizations to have workshops, classes, programs that people come to, but I think that we need to pay more attention to things like social media, and as time goes on, pay more attention to things like video storytelling or virtual reality, which is, I think, something we can use in the future for education.
Great, thank you. So, ladies, I'm going to ask you about some successes and failures, maybe using this approach or other approaches and engaging with the public. And most importantly, what we want to know is some of the lessons that you learned, whether there are lessons that will help you to make more wins in the future, or there are lessons that were like, ooh, I shouldn't do that again. So I'll start with Jennifer, if that's okay.
Sure. So I think one of the biggest successes that we've been involved with is, and just in general that I've seen, is public engagement around the issue of fracking in Florida. When I think back to 5 years ago, nobody knew what fracking was, and of the people who did know what it was, most people would laughed at me when I said, "Hey, we should be a little bit concerned about this happening in Florida," and it has happened. And so since then, 90 cities and counties have passed ordinances or resolutions opposing fracking, which is amazing, especially given that a lot of that has happened from local public citizen engagement, right? Certainly there were a number of organizations, including ours and even folks in this room that I recognize, who were involved in this, but it was from the ground up, people getting involved at the local level. So I think one of the biggest takeaways from that was the way the story was told around why fracking is not a good fit for Florida, right? It was a clear story of here's the problem, here's the solution, we ban it, and then here's what you can do locally to make that a reality. Because otherwise these issues, I do think, tend to be really overwhelming.
Can you elaborate a little bit on how you engaged with the public? Like, how did you get that swell of support? What kind of tools did you use?
Sure. So when I think of public engagement, to me it also can be called organizing. And I think whatever we call it, it takes time and effort, right? Things that, we worked with allies across the state to empower local citizens with the tools, one, the research, right, and the studies across the country about the impacts fracking has to our land and our water in places where it has really taken a hold, like places like Pennsylvania and Texas. So we released a report called Fracking by the Numbers that quantitatively looked at the impacts. And then we took that science and gave it to, identified volunteers, trained them on the tools of engagement at the local level, like how do you get a local resolution or ordinance passed. I think the average person, that's kind of an overwhelming thing to make happen. So we gave them the step-by-step tools to make that happen, including the effective communication skills, right? How do you talk to a decision maker in a way that is clear, compelling, calm? So those were just some of the ways. And then certainly the second thing I'll add is the media. I think when I think of public engagement, sometimes I think it's easy to forget that the people who write our media stories every day are also Floridians and people who live here. And if we can educate them and engage them on these issues, that they have huge microphones to really impact what the majority of the state views every day, whether on the TV or hears on the radio, for example.
Great. So I just want to make sure that everyone got that she needed the science. She needed the science first, right? Mm-hmm. And then you took that out to the public in various ways. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But Tracy, we'd like to hear from you.
Sure. So through my dissertation, I worked on a public engagement project. It was really a stormwater retrofit project for the University of Florida campus that involved these aesthetic designs. And that was a success, and that was going to be hard. It's hard to budget, right? But we won an EPA Rainworks Challenge twice in a row doing this retrofit project. But when I got to Moat, things kind of changed because I am the public outreach point of contact for Red Tide. So no longer do I have to go out to the public to get people to talk to me. Across all political views and cultures, backgrounds, age, career paths, everybody wants to know about Red Tide and what we can do to stop it and where it's going to be and how it affects our health. So I'm in an interesting position with Moat where I have this just kind of handed to me. Like I can get the people engaged in science. So we have 3 different citizen science projects. The beach conditions reporting system, who uses that? Anybody? A couple people? Well, everybody should. Visitbeaches.org. It was first developed in 2006, and then I redeveloped it in 2015 when I got to Moat. And since then, we have gained 300,000 users for our beach conditions reporting website. And it doesn't just have those red tide effects like respiratory irritation, dead fish, and water discoloration. It tells you anything that you would want to know going to the beach no matter what, whether there's a bloom or not. So I wanted to make it a go-to point for people to check before they were going to the beach. And then we also have the smartphone app. Our other citizen science project that has been very successful is HabScope. Do we have any HabScope volunteers in here? We only have like 20 of them, so It would be very unique to have someone here. But it is a NASA-funded cell phone microscope that we're working on with NOAA and GCOOS. And it's a citizen science project allowing citizens to take a cell phone microscope out to the beach, take a sample, put it underneath the microscope, upload a 30-second video into an app. This app has an algorithm that automatically calculates the concentrations of red tide cells based on their shape, size, and swimming pattern. That number goes into our NOAA respiratory irritation model, so we get real-time results. This is the first project that I've worked on that's a citizen science project that we're getting quantitative results to match our qualitative effect reports that we had. So it's a really good match, and I think it's going to be amazing. Now, when it comes to failures, I've had a lot, and a lot of failures.
That's a true scientist.
We all have.
Yeah, we all have. It's an iterative process, right? But as far as public outreach, so I released an app, and I'm not going to call this specific one a failure because it's only a failure if you stop trying, right? So I've just released an app. It's called the Citizen Science Information Collaborative. The acronym is CSIC. I kind of just wanted to make that work, right? So we released CSIC before this red tide bloom, and we were like, oh, this is going to be awesome because people would complain about the BCRS being so, just one reporter at every beach, and it's not every beach. And so we were finally giving the public the power to report. We were putting it in their hands so they can make that report and help their community out by telling them where these effects are. Well, no one uses it. No one uses it. So I'm working on that. We have to revisit that and relaunch it in a different way. And what I'm doing is expanding it to include freshwater blooms and other environmental hazards and things. When the wastewater overflows happened, who noticed it first? Residents, right? When cyano blooms start, the residents notice it first, so that we can be there, we get those reports and be there before the media does to say what's actually going on instead of speculate. But as far as the true failures, it's social media. It really is a trial and error process with that, right? Because you really have to think about what you're going to say and who's going to respond and all the different ways they can respond before you post anything.
That's impossible, but a great goal. Melissa, how about you? Successes and failures.
Right. So when I think about successes, it's tough to sort of narrow it down and pick because probably like everyone up here, we've had some really exciting programs and initiatives and projects. But I would say that for our department and our division from a broader scope, our biggest success is our ability to leverage partnerships. And if you're not doing that and you don't take anything else from this talk, please go back to your organization or your community or wherever it is you've come from and remember that partnerships really can help you do a lot more with very little. When I started at my department, it was just me 12 years ago. And that meant that I had to make a lot of friends really fast that could help me do some really great things. And just looking around the room, there are so many different people here that represent the organizations and even just individual citizens, because I know I have at least 3 volunteers here who are hardworking volunteers who do programs for us. We've got different partners out here who've given us grant money. One is sitting right beside me. Was. Yeah, at one point, yeah. So it's been, and even in our own department, working with Nan has been awesome because she's done a really great job bringing in funds and also helping us to do communication. And Damon and Aaron have been incredible in terms of taking over some volunteer groups and also helping plan out and organize volunteer events. So it's just been amazing to get those partnerships to come in. And sometimes it's money, sometimes it's bodies. Karen is the queen of getting volunteers out. And it's awesome because the volunteers that she reaches are sometimes different than the ones that we normally reach when we cast our net out. So that's really, really lovely. And sometimes you'll find a partner that is just so enthusiastic about a project, like the Start Friends, who Marianne and Sandy, who have taken this Gulf Coast oyster recycling project and just blasted off with it. And we're just sort of sitting there going, okay, we'll do whatever you want. Yes, it's just amazing. And that's just added a program that never in a million years would we have even dreamed to be able to do, but because they have the ability to hold all those pieces of the webs together, it works out really well. So partnerships are critical. So failures, like you said, there have been some. We've got a list. My personal favorite one, though, is one that we fondly refer to as Gophergate. Gophergate. And it comes back to social media, right? But this is a failure. It's a failure, but it's also a success. So we had a prescribed fire. It went beautifully. It was so great. We actually even were able to have a volunteer take some of the most beautiful photos you've ever seen of a prescribed fire. And a few days later, this photo ran in the Bradenton Herald of a dead gopher tortoise. That was conveniently in the middle of the trail, which was really interesting. And how it managed to get right in the middle of the trail and decide to expire there, I don't know. But somehow that happened. And there were some issues with this. Like there were some other photos, and we were able to prove that they had been doctored. So it was a really interesting, this whole situation. But the public doesn't care, right? They only know what they see. And so we dealt with about 2 weeks worth of responses to this one photo and this one article. And one of the things we learned, I think collectively as a department, is when something comes up like that, you have to face it head on. Like you can't say, well, yes, we had a fire, but that gopher tortoise shouldn't have been there, or whatever. You have to be really honest. Like that's not really the right habitat for that. It kind of doesn't matter. You have to understand that the public is going to want some answers, and you just answer as best as you can, as authentically as you can. And also remember that in like a week, something else is going to totally take their attention away from it, right. Because the very next week, I think it was either Yellowstone or Yosemite had the person that helped the baby bison by loading it into their car.
Oh, yeah.
And suddenly what happened with us was completely forgotten. So social media, all joking aside, it does have a very short lifespan, but it's important to understand that that can be a big failure. But one thing that was a great success for us was as the comments were flying back and forth, how could you do this? It happens, right? Those of us that do prescribed fire understand that sometimes there is a wildlife mortality rate. We just hope that people don't capture it with their cell phone. The truth is, we had an army, and I mean over 100 comments of people that were our volunteers and some of our staff members, but mostly volunteers and friends, and certainly not people that I called and said, hey, can you please post this because I can't do it? But those people came forward and they become your advocates. So when you put your message out there and you do it in a way that people are able to really absorb, they will help you spread it further.
It's a great piece of knowledge. Thank you. Nanette.
I've had a bunch of failures too, and almost every education campaign I worked on for the estuary program, I would say, had successful elements and elements that failed. And I think it's really important that we have the freedom in your jobs to be able to fail sometimes. You cannot, it's hard, especially with limited money, especially if you work for a government agency or a nonprofit. You don't want to waste money, but you'll never advance, you'll never grow, you'll never learn if you don't fail once in a while. So the biggest success I had, and I know it's a campaign that many of you are familiar with, was the Bee Floridian Fertilizer Education Campaign coordinated by the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. This was a campaign to support local governments in the Tampa Bay region, the fertilizer ordinances that they adopted, including really innovative, groundbreaking ordinances in Tampa and Pinellas County that actually prohibited the sale of nitrogen fertilizers in the summertime. And Sarasota County actually was the lead on fertilizer ordinances, and then that kind of migrated up north to the Tampa Bay region. The region trusted the Tampa Bay Estuary Program because of those long-term partnerships and the credibility the program had built through its community-based and science-based management, trusted the Estuary Program to really be the regional lead for education on fertilizer. And this was a social marketing campaign that really, I think, allowed allowed me for the first time to really tick off all the boxes of a really good social science-based education effort. And that involved research at the start, demographic research, message testing, focus groups, and then to implement the campaign over a number of years with enough money, which is important, and the support of the Estuary Program Board to actually be able to try a lot of different things and to measure what we were doing, which is how we knew that we had a measurable reduction in fertilizer use in the summertime, which is what we were getting at from this program. And the campaign actually was very focused on a positive message. And I would encourage all of you in your messaging to try to switch to a more positive message rather than the gloom and doom, all the polar bears are dying, the polar ice caps are melting, algae is everywhere.
So is microplastics.
Yeah, exactly. We hear it constantly, and people get overwhelmed by that and feel that they can't do anything. So the message of Be Floridian was, we all care about the waters. Let's reduce our fertilizer use and save the bay for fun. And we were able to actually measure that. So it really ticked off all the elements there.
Great advice. Be positive.
Be positive.
Collect data.
Collect data.
Build off your networks. I like all these successes and failures, and it's been really fun to talk about them, but it's time to get uncomfortable. And so you have to get uncomfortable to make change and make waves. So I'm going to tell you something that I believe, that you might not believe, but there's evidence to back my belief. I believe that one of our failures is not going to be popular, maybe, that it's the environmental community is ensuring public engagement is inclusive. So I believe one of our failures is that we haven't ensured inclusivity in all of our discussions, in all of our decision making. I think that we have missed or been exclusive to races, ethnicities, physical abilities, and economic positions. And while I know that this exclusivity has not been deliberate, but it's happening nonetheless. So I'd really like to talk to you guys about what you think has perpetuated maybe exclusivity, or maybe you don't have the same belief, I'm not sure. But I would like you to comment on the equality and engagement among among audiences, traditional, and maybe some that might have been left out. And I would like Melissa to start.
Okay. So this is actually something that we're really passionate about in our division, and we have finally, after 12 years of working with the county, we have finally gotten to a place where we have programs running regularly and volunteers working really hard and educators that are just fantastic. And now we're finally able to address, I think, what is really kind of that white elephant of how do we get diverse audiences out that we are not reaching? And it's like you said, I don't take offense at all because it's not intentional at all. In my world, if I want people to come out to a program, I use my regular marketing methods, right? They may not be reaching those audiences that you just mentioned. So we are working really hard to shift our program focus so that everything that's been awesome and working is still going on, and now we're going to start taking some risks and trying to figure out how we can connect with some of those audiences. And it's small steps at first, and identifying people that can immediately connect you, again, it's partnerships, but identifying those people that can immediately connect you are what's been working for us. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that, like for us, it wasn't deliberate. We certainly have been partnering with places like the Palmetto Youth Center and some of the organizations in Title I communities, but they'll come out for a field trip, and that's awesome. Mm-hmm. But then after that, the kids' families may not come out. And so that's what we're looking at, moving behind that initial contact and seeing how we can keep everyone coming back. That's one of the things that we're looking at and working on now. And we're also really looking at how we can make nature accessible to people who may have different limitations. That's something that we're really focusing on right now, because especially there's a very large movement to make sure that children and adults that have different limitations in terms of development, and also anything that's considered a neurological or an emotional ability. We're working really hard on that, and one of the things that we've been doing is we're creating a safe space so that when we have some of our large signature events, especially for kids that are autistic or anyone who might be triggered by the loud noises and all the stuff that's going on, they have a place where they can go. So a lot of times it's reaching out to those communities and saying, what do you need? And then figuring out how you can meet some of those goals with what you're doing.
I love how you said it's community-based, and asking them what they need is definitely key. I want others to comment, but before I do, I think we should react to what the audience thinks about this. So if we can pull up question number 2, that would be great. I want to know that, in your opinion, has environmental education outreach been traditionally exclusive? Starting to break a sweat. Just kidding. All right, well, 72% reporting. It looks like about 70% believe that it has been traditionally exclusive. And I know that there's real barriers to inclusivity. And so I would like to spend some time just discussing what those barriers are so that we can come up with solutions to going across those barriers so that we could be more inclusive. Who would like to start?
I can.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Sure. So when I think of this issue, especially inclusivity, I think a lot of things come down to planning and intentionality. So the more that, certainly in my work, I've worked to be certainly far from where I'd like to be intentional about empowering other people with the microphone to share their stories about how environmental pollution, for example, has impacted, say, their health or the place that they live. So I think air pollution, I think, is a good example. So when we talk about air pollution, which certainly our region has, I think, okay, so who are the people most impacted by air pollution? They're people near power plants, right? That's one example. So how can I, as an environmental advocate, make sure that the person on the stage who's talking about this issue is the person who's most impacted by it? And I think a lot of it comes down to like outreach partnerships, which we talked about earlier, building trust between communities, right? I think trust is a really big thing. I've hear from some of our partners who have don't just work on environmental issues and also have big environmental justice programs that there hasn't always been that trust between environmental organizations and other not just solely environmental organizations. So I think it comes to relationships, trust, planning, intentionality, and again, creating the space for people to share their stories. And to put it bluntly, what I'm saying is that I think disproportionately environmental pollution impacts people of color, right? I think that is
well, that's
proven.
Definitely proven, and was recently released by the EPA as a report. Like we needed a report by the EPA to know that, but it synthesized all the research and definitely concluded that when you look at pollution, the biggest variable, or the variable that most describes the quantity of pollution for an individual, is race. Beyond economics, beyond geography even, is actually race. So that's an issue that's worth talking about and exploring even further. Unfortunately, in a 50-minute panel, we can't solve the world's problems. So we have 10 minutes left, and I would like to just hear if maybe Nanette or Tracy has something to say about how how we would cross the barriers into being more inclusive in all of our ways that we engage with the public, which was workshops and classes. And maybe it's those workshops and classes asking people to come to us might be part of the problem.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that because I get like super choked up when I talk about that. This is something that like really hits home with me, the whole diversity thing. And I'm from Buffalo. I grew up next to Love Canal, so I saw firsthand. And then, well, I mean, it happened before I was born. But the effects remain long term. And then, yeah, with my parents, you know, they're my parents. So when you're around people that think like you and look like you, everybody pretty much assumes that everybody thinks the same way. So it was really easy to tell my friends that if they throw their garbage on the ground, it's going to go into your natural water bodies. Harder to tell my parents not to drink bottled water. And I was really confused by that. I told them all the health effects and all the environmental effects, and they really didn't care about the environment too much. And so they became my guinea pig of how to cross that boundary. So it turned out that all I had to do was buy them a Brita filter, make that step easy, and then tell them how much money they're wasting, right? So connecting with economics is a big thing to cross those political boundaries. But now, as far as diversity goes, I just submitted 2 proposals, one to NSF and one to EPA for environmental literacy, where we are focusing on underprivileged communities and engaging diverse groups through, have you guys seen Black Panther? Oh, that's good, because that's not usually the response I get. Okay, so at the end, you know how, and I can't really talk about the end because, again, I get choked up, but at the end they had this big outreach project that they do. That's what we're proposing to do, but we're proposing to do it as a TV show. And the reason why that works is because everybody wants to be on TV, as it turns out. So it's really easy to engage the public, get them involved in that science, and then set schools up with a year-long kinesthetic learning activities. So that's my approach right now.
Awesome. So intentionality is what I'm hearing, which leads us to the third audience question. If we could pull that up.
It's really good.
So the question is, how does your organization prioritize education and outreach to marginalized communities? Is it a high priority, a medium priority, a low priority, not a priority, or you have no idea?
I love anybody who puts I don't know. Good for them.
Yeah. It's not a priority. I'm not surprised.
And it's okay if it's not a priority, because you can always go back and make it one.
That's right.
That's
That's
very
right.
true.
I like what Ryan said, Dr. Ryan Schlosser. I always mess up your name, Ryan.
I do
I'm
too,
so
and I work
sorry. He said that adaptive management is key, because if you hold a rigid framework that doesn't work, then you're not going to lead to success. So if we keep holding this rigid framework of what we're doing, like how we're engaging with the public, and we're not expanding our networks, and we're not being intentional, then we're not going to engage these new audiences that we seek to engage, because it's somewhat of a high priority for us. So thank you. Well, I do want to just say this, because I saw this quote, and it was really, I think if we think about this frame of mind, then it could help us as we march forward. In the summer of 1854, that was a long time ago, slavery was a thing, David Thoreau spoke to a highly charged abolitionist group, saying that he was asking, what signifies beauty of nature when men are base? The remembrance of my country spoils my walk. Okay, so in 1859, that was like real profound, or 1854. But what does it mean to you today? It means, like, in other words, when Henry David Thoreau, who wrote about Walden, right, and Walden Pond, he couldn't even enjoy nature anymore because of slavery. He thought that of human injustices every time he was trying to enjoy nature. So I think that we should think about human injustices as we're trying to enjoy nature, and whether or not we are able to include all the audiences to to enjoy that nature as well. All right, so we only have 5 minutes left, but what I really want to wrap up on is science communication, because as we mentioned, science communication is key. And so I want to know from the panelists, Nanette said something very interesting via email. I bet she says a lot of interesting things to a lot of interesting people. I wrote this one down. And by writing, I mean typing. You said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that scientists laid the credible foundation of which public trust is built. Did I say that right? Scientists laid the credible foundation which public trust is built. And so when you want to engage with the public, you said that you need, Jennifer, you said that you need trust. And so if scientists are the ones that lay that foundation, I'm wondering, what's the health check of our foundation? Is it crumbling? Is it robust? And what can we do as educators to make it more strong? And I hear beep, 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 beep. Is that for us? Oh, okay, great. And
I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but I will say that I don't necessarily expect scientists to always be the communicators. They are scientists. They are doing work, important work. I think that that is why there is a role for people like us who translate for scientists. We are the bridge between what they are doing and what the public understands or needs to understand about that research. So they do build the foundation. Everything that I did at the estuary program was based on science, but without having someone who can translate that into terms that different audiences can comprehend. And most importantly, I think that citizens don't always have to know everything that you know or we know. They have to know enough to act. So we get focused a lot of times, communicators, educators, on wanting everybody to know everything. They don't always need to know everything, but they do need to know why we're asking them to do something, and they need to know what it is we want them to do.
That's a great point. So when I educate on microplastics, I shouldn't tell them where you can find it in all the different places. Maybe that's too much information.
Tell them why it's a problem and what they can do about it.
I'm learning so much up here. I hope you all too. We are running out of time, and so I just want to conclude with maybe your concluding thought. What is something that you want to depart on this audience from your expertise and your experience about public engagement in science communication? And I will start with Jennifer, because she looks like she's ready.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to build on that. I think you took the words out of my mouth. I think the more that we can translate science into a story, and whether that's the scientists themselves, who I know a few scientists who are quite good at that,
I do too.
or partner with scientists, the more we can translate it into a story that, for us, we use problem, what's the problem, what's the solution, why is it urgent right now, amongst all the other things happening in the world, and then what is the one thing you can do right now, the one action. So, sign a petition, attend this meeting. One of those two. I think if we can boil that down for people, which is a lot of what I consider my job to be, I think the more people will be engaged, because they can actually wrap their head around what's going on and feel good about it.
Well, thank you so much, panelists. You've been really wonderful, and I hope that you all take the time to talk with them at the conclusion of this meeting. You can find them out in the lobby, and you can learn more about their vast expertise and their ability to engage the public in a successful and sometimes failing but successful way. Thank you very much.